I never expected to find myself in a hotel room with my son on a night like this. The plan had been simple. We were on a layover for a flight back home, nothing more. But the unexpected twist of events, flights delayed, car troubles, and my growing frustration had led us to seek refuge in a hotel for the night. I remember looking at my son, still so innocent, playing with his toy car on the bed, completely unaware of the weight of my thoughts. He seemed perfectly content, just happy to be with me, unaware that his father was fighting a war within himself. The room was small but cozy. I checked us in, unpacked a bit, and set up his toys so he wouldn't get bored. But even as I went through the motions, my mind kept drifting. The silence in the room felt louder than ever, pressing against my chest. I should have been focusing on my son, making sure he was enjoying himself during this impromptu trip. But I couldn't ignore the pull of the phone in my pocket, the vibration signaling an incoming message. I shouldn't have checked it, but I did. It was from her, the woman who wasn't my wife. The woman who had, over the last few months, become a dangerous temptation. A text, simple yet enough to stir the storm inside me. "When can I see you again?" I sighed, slipping the phone back into my pocket, trying not to let my son see the tension creeping across my face. He looked up from his game for a moment, his wide eyes full of trust, as if waiting for me to make everything okay. How could I explain to him that everything was far from okay? I wasn't a man who usually gave in to guilt, but it was eating at me now. I had never considered what this would mean for my marriage. Not really. There had been little whispers of doubt, of dissatisfaction. Small arguments with my wife, a slow drift that neither of us acknowledged until it was too late. The affair had started as an escape, an adrenaline rush, something exciting to fill the gaps of my mundane life. But now, as I sat there, staring at my son, it felt like the escape had turned into a prison of its own. The message from her had shaken me. What was I doing? I looked at my son, his face now illuminated by the TV as he watched some cartoon, oblivious to the storm inside me. He had no idea what was happening between his mother and me. He had no idea that I was letting him down in ways that would haunt him for years to come. But the reality was, I wasn't sure what I was anymore. Was I the man I once thought I was, the man who loved his wife and son? Or had I become someone entirely different, someone unable to control his desires, his impulses? I needed to get out of my head. "Hey, buddy," I said, trying to break the tension. "How about we go grab some dinner?" He looked up at me, eyes sparkling. "Yeah, that sounds fun," he said, his voice full of joy. And in that moment, I felt a flicker of warmth. He was just a kid, wanting nothing more than to have a good time with his dad. He didn't deserve any of this. But there was no escaping it. As much as I wanted to block out the thoughts swirling in my mind, there was no ignoring the truth. I had a secret, and it was slowly tearing me apart. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to let go of it. The affair was still there, lingering in the back of my mind, pulling me toward the edge. We went out for dinner, tried to act normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a subtle tension between my son and me that hadn't been there before. I wondered if he felt it, if he sensed that things weren't as they should be. And then, when we got back to the room, it happened again. The phone vibrated. This time, I knew I couldn't ignore it. Another message. "Can't wait to see you tonight." It was an invitation. A decision I had to make. Should I leave my son in the room, unattended, just to meet her? I knew it was wrong. I knew the consequences could be devastating. But in that moment, all I could think about was the escape, the release she offered. I looked at my son again. He was already lying in bed, the covers pulled up to his chin. He had no idea what was going on inside my head, and I hated myself for it. I had no idea how I had gotten here, how I had come to a point where this all felt like a blur. "Hey, buddy," I said softly. "I'll be right back. Stay here, okay?" He nodded, already half asleep. I left the room, stepping into the quiet hallway, my heart racing. I stepped out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest. The hallway felt too cold, too quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. I hadn't told my son where I was going, and I regretted it immediately. I couldn't explain it to him. What could I say? That I was meeting a woman I'd been seeing behind his mother's back? The guilt gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside. I needed to get this over with. My phone buzzed again, pulling me back to the reality of the situation. Her name lit up the screen. "Where are you?" the message read. The pressure in my chest intensified. I was running out of time. I tried to ignore the voices in my head, the reminders of what I was doing, but it felt impossible. Every step I took felt heavier, as if I was sinking deeper into a hole I couldn't crawl out of. I had made a decision a long time ago to live in the shadows, to keep this secret and pretend everything was fine. But now, standing here in the empty hotel hallway, it all felt wrong. My mind raced with conflicting thoughts. I had promised my wife that I would be loyal. I had promised myself I would never let things get this far. But here I was, on the verge of betraying her yet again, sneaking away from my son. And for what? A fleeting moment of excitement? A release from the monotony of everyday life? It didn't seem worth it anymore, but I couldn't stop myself. Her message came through again. "You coming?" I stood there for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, unsure of how to respond. What was I even doing? The woman on the other side of the phone didn't care about my family, didn't care about the damage I was doing. She just wanted to see me, to fulfill some desire that had nothing to do with love, nothing to do with anything real. But I had grown accustomed to this routine. It had become a part of who I was, a part of me I didn't know how to get rid of. I had let the affair go on long enough that I wasn't sure if I could stop it now, even if I wanted to. My mind felt clouded, like I was in a fog, unsure of what was right and wrong anymore. I thought of my son again, the way he looked up at me with those trusting eyes, as if I were still the hero he believed I was. But how could I be his hero if I kept betraying everything we were supposed to stand for? How could I be his protector when I was slowly unraveling everything I had promised to keep intact? I typed a quick reply. "I'll be there soon." The words felt hollow as I pressed send. There was no turning back now. The affair had taken on a life of its own, and so had the lies. I had built this world of deceit, and I was the one who had to live in it. I couldn't blame anyone else. I walked out the hotel door, my thoughts churning, spinning out of control. I told myself I would be back quickly. It wouldn't be long. I'd just meet her, get it out of my system, and return to my son. I could convince myself of that, at least. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. There was no way to fix what I had done. Even if I walked away from the affair right now, the damage had already been done. I couldn't erase the lies, the secret life I had created. The guilt would stay with me now. I could feel the weight of every step as I walked back to the hotel room. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my thoughts were spinning. The brief encounter, the one I had convinced myself would release the tension, had only made everything worse. It hadn't made me feel free. It had only deepened the sense of suffocation that had been building in me for months. When I reached the door, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to run. Part of me wanted to just keep walking, to leave it all behind and disappear. But I couldn't. I couldn't abandon him. My son. He was still in there, asleep, unaware of how I had betrayed him, how I had betrayed everything we were supposed to be. I opened the door quietly, slipping inside. The room was dimly lit, and my son was curled up in bed, fast asleep. I stood there for a moment, watching him. His face was so innocent, so trusting. It hit me like a physical blow. He had no idea what I had just done, what kind of person I had become. How could I look at him now, knowing I was the one responsible for destroying the trust he had in me? I sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breath. I should have stayed home. I should have fought harder to make things work. But instead, I had allowed this affair to continue, feeding the lies and the guilt, letting it take over my life. Now, I was stuck in a situation where I didn't know how to get out, and I didn't know how to fix any of it. My phone buzzed in my pocket again. Another message from her. But this time, it felt like nothing more than an annoyance, a reminder of the life I had created for myself outside of this room. I ignored it. The truth was, I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I didn't want to keep pretending that what I was doing had any value. I couldn't keep living like this. The lies, the guilt, the secrecy, it was all starting to eat away at me. I had made a choice that night to be with my son, to try and make it work. But the moment I had stepped outside to meet her, I had shattered whatever small sense of control I had left. I had given in to temptation, to something that had been pulling me away from my family for too long. I glanced at my son again, still sound asleep. I wanted to promise him everything would be okay, but I knew I couldn't. I had already broken that promise. The guilt and shame were unbearable now. I couldn't look at him without feeling like a fraud, a failure. How could I go on pretending everything was fine when I was living a lie? The truth was, I had been slowly losing myself in the affair. I had been lying to everyone, especially to myself. I needed to make a decision, but the weight of it all felt too much. I couldn't keep running from this. I had to face what I had done, face the consequences of my actions. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I stood up from the bed, pacing the small space of the room. My mind was racing. What had I done? What kind of man had I become? I wasn't sure anymore. The person I used to be, the man who had promised to protect his family, to love and cherish his wife, was slipping away. And in his place, a stranger had emerged, someone consumed by selfishness and desire, someone who didn't know how to stop. The phone buzzed again. This time, I picked it up, unable to ignore it any longer. It was her once again. "Where are you? I miss you." The words stung. They were a reminder of the choices I had made, the choices I had continued to make. But they didn't make me feel wanted or loved or desired. They only made me feel more isolated. I looked at my son one more time, his soft breath steady and calm. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could see clearly. I was a father, a husband, and I had lost sight of that. I had lost myself in a momentary escape, and now I was facing the consequences. I couldn't fix everything, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to stop. I had to stop lying, stop running, stop pretending. It was time to face my wife. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it would be. I couldn't keep living this double life. As I stood there, the weight of my decisions pressing down on me, I made a promise to myself. It was time to end this. I would walk away from the affair, from the lies, from the self-destruction. I would face my family and start to rebuild, piece by piece. I didn't know how or when, but I knew I had to try. I couldn't keep going like this. For my son, for my wife, for me, it had to end. I stood there, feeling the weight of everything I had done pressing down on me. The phone buzzed again, but I ignored it. Each time it vibrated, it felt like another reminder of the mess I had created, a mess that I couldn't fix just by walking away from it. I glanced at my son, still asleep, and I felt a rush of shame flood over me. I had promised myself I wouldn't let him grow up in a broken home, but here I was, teetering on the edge of destroying everything. I had been a fool. I had justified the affair, telling myself it was an escape, that it was just a momentary lapse, but it wasn't. It was a betrayal, one that I would have to live with for the rest of my life. I had built this false world around myself, trying to avoid the issues in my marriage, avoiding the cracks that had started to form long ago. But now, everything had come to a head, and I couldn't hide from it anymore. I couldn't pretend that what I had done hadn't changed everything. I thought about the conversation I needed to have with my wife. I had been avoiding it for too long. I had hoped I could sweep it all under the rug, continue living my life without having to face the mess I'd created. But I couldn't keep running from the truth. I owed it to her, and I owed it to myself, to stop hiding and face what I had done. The shame weighed heavily on my chest. How could I have done this to her? To my family? To my son? She deserved better than this. I had taken the love and trust she had given me and shattered it, piece by piece. I had been selfish, focusing on my own desires without considering the damage it would cause. And now, standing here in this quiet hotel room, it was impossible to ignore the consequences of my actions. I had no idea what I was going to say to her when I finally did come clean. Would she ever forgive me? Could she even look at me the same way again? The questions swirled in my mind, but none of them brought me any closer to the solution. I couldn't change what I had done, but I could change what I did next. I could stop the lies, stop the affair, and start taking responsibility for the man I was supposed to be. I felt like a stranger to myself. This wasn't who I was. The man I had become was someone I didn't recognize, someone I never wanted to be. The affair had changed me, and I didn't know how to undo the damage. But I had to try. I had to find a way to rebuild, to fix the things I had broken. As I sat there, staring at my son, I realized that the first step was to stop running. I couldn't hide from this anymore. I had to face the reality of my situation and take accountability for my actions. I had to tell my wife the truth, no matter how difficult it would be. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. I had to be honest, even if it meant losing everything I had worked so hard to build. I looked at my son one more time, his peaceful face giving me a brief sense of calm. I had to do this for him, for his future, for the man I used to be. The guilt, the shame, the fear, they would always be a part of me, but they couldn't control me anymore. I couldn't